If you have your Bibles, we were walking through the book of James, and we're just at the very beginning here, James chapter 1. If you want to see for yourself, that's where you should be turning, James chapter 1. If you ask a little kid what they want to be when they grow up, it might change. The answer might change 3 times before they even eat their breakfast. Some kids kind of lock in exactly what they want, but a lot of kids are just they're just changing their mind all the time. And what I have found is what's true for little kids is sometimes even true for older kids as well. I didn't realize this. I was verifying this today, but a lot of colleges do not require you to declare a major until after your sophomore year, which seems a little insane to me with the price of college, that you have basically applied for a college, you've gone to a college for 2 years, and then you decide what it is you actually want to study. I'm not sure that's the way I'd want to handle things. But I actually had a buddy. His name is Trey. He's actually a children's minister at Woodland West here in Arlington now. But back in the day, he and Maggie grew up together. They're very close friends. And so I've known him for a really long time. And when it was time for him to graduate from high school, he was unsure about which college he wanted to go to. And so he was torn between Harding and ACU. And so he had actually went ahead and applied to both Harding and ACU, and he had great grades. He got into both schools, and then he went through the entire process of enrollment. The process that you have to go through as a freshman, where you enroll in all of your classes. You got to get your class schedule. You have to find the housing assignment. You get assigned a roommate, and he went through that entire process at both schools. And he graduated. The summer kind of rolled by, and the longer it got into the summer, the deeper it went, the more unsure he was on where he was going to go to school. And it got to the point where he literally had an assignment of a room at both places. It was basically the same time of the year, getting ready to leave. His parents actually rented one of those cargo vans to take all of his stuff to college in. And while they're loading up the cargo van, they still don't know if they're going to go east or they're going to go west. And he literally did not decide until it was more or less like the day came, it's time to go. And he decided to go to Harding for undergrad. And then guess where he went for graduate school? He went to ACU for graduate school. So he ended up going to both schools. But it kind of stressed me out to be a friend of his at the time. You're like, Trey, you have to make up your mind. And someone in this deal is going to be sad when they get to college and the person they thought was their roommate does not show up to college. But that's what happened. Sometimes we're indecisive about things. Sometimes those are big things. Sometimes we struggle to make a decision on some really big things in life. But sometimes it's not so big things. Sometimes like choosing a major, choosing a spouse, choosing a church, those are big decisions you probably need to go into thoughtfully. But sometimes we are even indecisive about, where we're going to eat dinner. What am I going to wear today? We can struggle sometimes with this indecisiveness, waffling back and forth. And so I want to look at this James passage and to see what James has to say about making up our minds, because life is full of decisions, and life is basically a series of choices all day, every day. And then our lives are essentially the outcome of those choices we make. We have to evaluate, we have to decide, we have to draw conclusions. In fact, preacher and author Frank Borman said, we make our decisions and then our decisions make us. And so I want to think about that tonight. The quality of your life being determined by the quality of the decisions that you make in life. Some of them we regret, some of them we feel really good about. There was a young businessman who went to an executive one day, and he asked the executive, he said, I need some wisdom. What is the secret for business success? And the man just said, well, it's wise decisions. And the young businessman said, how can I learn to make wise decisions? And the experienced businessman said, experience. And he said, well, how do I get experience? And he said, dumb decisions. Sometimes we wait too long to make a decision. Sometimes we have no choice because a decision is upon us and we just have to make it. And I just want you to think about that tonight, how you make decisions. Some of you may be making some decisions even right now. Maybe this week you're having to make a tough decision. Some of you have a decision waiting for you around the corner that you're not even aware of yet, and you'll have to at some point make a decision about that. So I want to think about that in terms of what James has to say about that. Look at James chapter 1, starting in verse 5. We've already read kind of the first 4 verses. Let's keep going, where James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, Well, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. I want to drill down for just a second on that last verse, verse 8. That phrase, double-minded, it's really an interesting phrase. If you kind of drill down into what it really means in the original language, it's like a two-souled person. It's like you have two parts of you, like split in half. You have divided loyalties. Maybe you're pulled in two different directions. Maybe you have divided priorities. And I think we've all felt that way at times when we are trying to do two things at once. You know, you're like, I'm kind of down, I want to go down this road, but I also kind of want to go down this road, where we get torn like that sometimes. That double-mindedness is a universal human experience. In fact, Dr. Seuss, a.k.a. Theodore Geisel, dedicated himself to writing, these very simple, thoughtful poems, and he wanted to use basic words. But every once in a while, he would introduce a nonsense word, and sometimes those nonsense words actually meant something. He had a poem called Zode in the Road, and apparently, even though the word Zode is a nonsense word, what's a zode? It actually comes from a Greek word that means to stair step or ladder, and it means like the device you would use to get somewhere. So I want to read to you. Did I ever tell you about the young Zode who came to two signs in the fork of the road? He looked one way and the other way too. The Zode had to make up his mind what to do. Well, the Zode scratched his head and his chin and his pants, and he said to himself, I'll be taking a chance. If I go to place one, that place may be hot, so how will I know if I like it or not? On the other hand, though, I'll feel such a fool if I go to place two and find that it's too cool. In that case, I may catch a chill and turn blue, so place one may be best and not place two. On the other hand, though, if place one is too hot, I might get a terrible earache and die. On the other hand, though, if place two is too low, I might get some terrible pain in my toe, so place one may be best. And he started to go, and then he stopped, and he said, on the other hand, though, on the other hand, the other hand, though, for 36 hours and one half that Zode made starts and made stops at the fork in the road, saying, no, don't take a chance, it may not be right. Then he got an idea that was wonderfully bright. Play safe, cried the Zode. I'll play safe. I'm no dunce. I'll simply start off to both places at once. And that's how the Zode, who would not take a chance, went no place at all with the split in his pants. And so some of you are here tonight to hear this. Sometimes you have to make a decision because indecision can make you unstable. That is not a desirable place to be. That is one of the things that James is teaching. Double-mindedness is debilitating and devastating and very problematic. And so I want to talk about these two ideas of double-mindedness and unstableness. The word for unstable that he actually talks about there, he uses the word unstable, is the same language you would use about a drunk person. When someone gets intoxicated and they're stumbling around, they lose their balance. That's the very same kind of word he's talking about, but he's talking about that in the context of just being indecisive. It reminds me very much of the Zode. And you think about how indecisiveness can make you unstable. Indecisiveness makes your emotions unstable. When you have a tough decision to make and you put it off and you put it off and you put it off, you can't sleep very well. It's hard to eat sometimes. You just feel really anxious and uptight, and you can get irritable and angry. And when someone really wants to push you into a decision that you really don't want to make, you can lash out at that person or you can retreat inwards. It can make you emotionally unstable. Just being indecisive can do that to you. Being indecisive makes relationships unstable. What is the cliche of so many romantic comedies? It is one person who wants the other person to make a commitment, but they're afraid of commitment. I don't want to make a commitment. And they run away. Or you think about how you can be unstable in your career if you are indecisive. If you are in almost any career, there are these forks in the road that you have to take from time to time. And if you stand there too long, it's too late. The decision has been made for you in many cases. And so standing there, being indecisive can make your career unstable. But the worst kind of unstableness that indecision creates is an unstable spiritual life. And this is something that maybe you've never considered that James is teaching here. The indecisive person, the doubtful person, check this out, James chapter 1, verse 7. That person, what does the Bible say? That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Whew. That's not a very fun daily devotional verse. My indecisiveness can lead to somehow being blocked. My prayer requests not being effective. Yes, that is what James is teaching here. And this is, again, perhaps the most troubling part of this passage. Double-mindedness leads to a double life where we are imagining all scenarios or two scenarios. It's like this spiritual schizophrenia, this Jekyll and Hyde of our personalities, and it can create for us this habit we have sometimes that we get into where who we are on Sunday is different than who we are on Monday. Those two people can look different. Double-mindedness. So the problem, again, is indecision. And I think it's clear that James is saying this is maybe a bigger problem that you might have considered. This is a real powerful concept to pay attention to. So what is the solution? And the solution is really relatively straightforward. Look again at verse 5. Again, we're in James chapter 1. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, which again, let's pause there and go, okay, if I am in a moment of decision, that's really what I'm seeking, right? Before I make the decision, what I want is to be wise to make the right decision. So, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. So, again, we've already acknowledged this last week. One of the beauties of James is here it is. He's not given a big soliloquy. He doesn't go on and on. He gets right to the point. And he basically lays out some steps, some solutions to double-mindedness. And one of them very clearly is you have to admit that you have a need. If any of you lacks wisdom, what does that require? Well, some self-reflection, some honesty to say, I don't have all the answers just yet. The admission of the lack of wisdom is, in many ways, the beginning of wisdom. And I want to say, too, this can be a terrible character fault that goes even beyond personality into a spiritual deficiency where we really don't want to look foolish. I don't want anyone to think I don't know what I'm doing. And when you don't want people to think you don't know what you're doing, you start to lean in on other adages like, fake it till you make it, right? Just fake it till you make it. Just try stuff and make it look like you know what you're doing. Just pretend. Which is, again, maybe good advice for certain situations, but not particularly a good piece of spiritual advice where I'm not quite sure what to do, I lack wisdom, and I'm going to pretend like I do. That's terrible. That's a terrible idea. You have to admit when you don't have all the answers. And so maybe the key to wisdom is to start by saying, I don't know, God. What do you want me to do? I don't know what to do here. I'm not going to presume that I do know what to do here. Admit that you don't have all the answers. Admit that you have a need. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. If with humility comes wisdom, then you could flip that and say, pride blocks wisdom. You can't learn anything if you think you know it all anyway. I mean, if I know it all, I have nothing to learn, and so you won't. So step one is to admit, I think, and step two is something he says here point blank, ask. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. Ask. It kind of reminds me of during the space race in the 60s, all the effort that NASA allegedly put into building a pin that would ride in space. There's no gravity in space. You have all kinds of issues with the vacuum of space. And then, of course, inside the space capsules, how exactly do you have a pin that writes? And so they worked on it. And, of course, the famous Soviet solution, right? They just used a pencil. That's probably apocryphal. It probably has a little bit of truth to it, not entirely. But it does remind me of another story where there was another company back in the 70s. Think about how long before you had a digital camera that was, the 70s. There was a company that had a guy named Steve Sasson that worked for their company, and he invented the digital camera. He actually had a finished version ready to go in 1975. When did you buy your first digital camera? It probably wasn't in 1975. In fact, it very likely happened some 2 decades after that. The only problem is Steve Sasson worked for Kodak, who sold film and wanted nothing to do with digital photography because that was going to take a huge bite out of their film business. Now, I'm not sure, but I don't think Kodak even exists anymore as a company, but they might have if they listened to old Steve. It was this resource that was right under their nose that they ignored. In the case of NASA, in the case of Kodak, and sometimes in the case of us, asking for wisdom. I mean, it's just like one of those I guess I should. I guess I do need to approach decisions by saying, Lord, give me wisdom in this decision. Pray and talk to God. James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God. I just don't want to have a moment, where I'm in heaven and God's like, you had a resource all along, you just never asked. What a tragedy that would be to hear someday. 20 times, the New Testament says, ask and it will be given to you. And many of those were by our Savior, Jesus. Ask and it will be given to you. And that word, by the way, it implies, even that word right there, it implies a continual asking. This is a mistake I've made, where I've taken even James's teaching here as to mean I ask once and then assume it's a done deal. This is a continual asking. It's also, by the way, a continually admitting that we need wisdom and continually asking. And if you continually admit, then you can maybe lead you to continually asking. And then step 3, and this is a powerful one that James doesn't want you to miss either, you have to anticipate an answer from God. James is going to really double down on this point in this chapter. You have to anticipate it, expect an answer in faith. You anticipate an answer from the Lord. It is one thing to recognize your need for wisdom. It's another thing to ask God for it. But there's a whole chasm to cross from step 2 to step 3, and that is faithfully anticipating an answer from God. This is what he says. Again, this is not my words. Look at James. James chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Period. End of sentence. However, he's going to say, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. One of the saddest things, I think, is considering someone who has the foresight, the humility to say, I'm not sure what to do, I'm going to ask God, but I don't necessarily expect anything. You start to think about how sad that is, where you've gone right up to the edge, but you haven't really believed. In fact, even maybe saying, I prayed about it, nothing happened, I kind of figured that. Well, I kind of figured that is why nothing happened. That's what James is saying. You set yourself up. God says, if you can't believe you're going to get it, don't even waste time praying. Pray in faith, believing, thanking God in advance, because doubt is debilitating and it hinders God from working in your life. It reminds me very much of Peter walking on the water. A couple of years ago, my mother-in-law, she was still at the Hills then, and she needed someone in their big musical to play Jesus. And so I was like, does he sing? And she said no. I was like, then I could do it. I was like, wait, does he dance? No? Okay, yes, I can do it. And so we played out, actually, the story of Peter. And so I got to play Jesus in that scenario, and it was a beautiful moment to be able to, to pretend like you're Jesus, but to see Peter coming across where he's looking right at you, and he's walking out, and it's this great moment. But then what changes that moment is when Peter does what? It's when Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he notices the waves around him. He takes his eyes off of the object of his faith, and he places them on the object of his fear. And suddenly, that's all it takes for him to begin to sink. And some of you have, these really big problems. And I will confess Yes, they are very big problems, and you don't know how to solve them, and you're backed into a corner. And the decision is difficult because it's a hard decision to make for anyone. And I want to say you need to get your eyes off the problem and off the circumstance, and you need to get your eyes on the Lord. If you have your eyes on your problem, you're going to sink. You have to believe and not doubt. That's what James says. You have to believe and not doubt. And what does Jesus say to Peter when he sinks? Oh, you of little faith. James says, he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. And it is that imagery of Peter out there on the sea. And a lot of Christians are like little corks in the ocean, bobbing around back and forth, victims of the circumstances, blown this way and that. And maybe that's you, and maybe it's in part because you haven't learned to admit that you need wisdom, you haven't asked God for that wisdom, and you haven't had the discernment to anticipate He's actually going to give you that wisdom. And then you say, well, eventually I'll pray like that. But that's not how it works either. Prayer's not like a last resort. That ought to be the first option. So ask God. It's God's nature to give. God is a giving God. In fact, look again back at verse 5 and verse 6. One of the reasons I love James is he just goes ahead and outlines the sermon for you. He does it in verse 5. Very beautiful. Verse 5 is its own little sermon with 3 points. It says, God gives wisdom continually. He says, ask God who gives. So it's not only we ask and keep on asking, it is God gives and He keeps on giving. It is continually. He keeps on giving. He doesn't wear out of energy. He doesn't run out of resources. So He says God gives continually. Ask God who gives. And then it also says who gives generously, which again is a beautiful, beautiful image where His resources are unlimited. He's got enough for everybody, and He wants to share. He's generous with His resources. And then it says He gives without finding fault, which I love that as well. Because you have probably at some point in your life been given a gift, maybe even a generous gift by someone, but they sort of did it grudgingly. And maybe even made you feel guilty about that gift. And what I love about the qualifier that James gives, it says God does not give that way. He doesn't give, He gives without finding fault. He's happy to do this. The Bible says God does not give wisdom as someone who gives a gift and sort of does it grudgingly. He loves to give. It's His nature to give. You don't have to feel embarrassed. There should never be any hesitation. God doesn't resent you for asking for wisdom. He's pleased when you ask. So I kind of want to kind of bring this to bear for you by asking where is exactly that you need wisdom tonight. What's the big decision in your life? Maybe it's a career decision, relationship decision, church membership decision, investment decision, whatever it is. By the way, it's interesting in James, in verses 5 through 8 and verses 9 through 11, he gives us a practical application. We're not going to read them all tonight, all those verses, but of all the areas that James could have given a practical example of, the thing he chooses is money. Why? Well, maybe because more people make unwise decisions and foolish choices regarding their finances than most anything else in the world. More people are double-minded and unstable when it comes to dollars than any other area. And there's a lot of people that live in financial bondage because they're violating God's principles. And James is making these verses, it's regardless of poverty or prosperity, it's not going to last forever. So Jesus Himself, by the way, talked about that same concept. He says about money, He says, no one can serve two masters. Don't be double-minded when it comes to money. You can't love God and money at the same time, so you have to decide. So my question for you, really the application question for you tonight is this, and that is, where are you double-minded? Where have you been trying to have it both ways? Where have you been different here than you are over here? Where have you been the zode in the road? Starting down this way and then changing your mind and starting down this way and then coming back again. Maybe there's a place that you've been trying to live during the week that you downplay, at church on Sunday, or maybe it's the other way around. That produces instability. The greatest decision that we'll make in our life We're talking about decision making. The greatest decision we're going to make is who's in charge of our life. Who is it? Who's in charge? And if it's, going to be you or a job or even family or money, a hobby, that will all produce instability in your life. It will all produce double-mindedness in your life. The most important decision you can ever make is to make Jesus Christ number one. That's what it means to make Him Lord of your life. That means He is in charge. So, who's number one? I challenge you to put Jesus in charge of your decisions.